When my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own house, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for years. There's a difference between being kind and being a doormat, and I had spent so long letting people walk all over me, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand on solid ground. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old. I live in a small house on Sycamore Street in a little town called Oak Haven, just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's not a fancy house. It's got a front porch that creaks in the summer and a big maple tree in the backyard that turns the most beautiful shade of orange every October. My husband, Frank, and I bought this house in 1978. We raised our son, Brian, here. We celebrated birthdays, cried over broken hearts, and drank coffee on that porch every single Sunday for 30 years. Frank passed away 8 years ago, a heart attack. One minute he was laughing at a commercial, the next he was gone. It was sudden, and it left a hole in this house that I thought would never be filled. For a long time it was. The silence was deafening. I'd find myself talking to his empty chair, asking him what he thought about the weather or if I should make meatloaf for dinner. But life goes on, even when you don't want it to. My son Brian, he's a good man. He works in finance, a serious job with a serious title. He's smart, driven, and he was his father's pride and joy. About 6 years ago, he married a woman named Vanessa. Vanessa is, well, she's beautiful. She's got that glossy magazine kind of look. She works in brand management, which I still don't fully understand, but it involves a lot of meetings and a lot of black clothing. At first, I was just so happy Brian had found someone. He was in his late 30s, and I worried he'd be alone forever. The wedding was beautiful, a big event at a vineyard. I wore a dusty rose dress I'd saved for months to buy. I sat in the front row, Frank's chair empty beside me, and I cried happy tears. I thought, this is it, our family is growing. I thought Vanessa would be the daughter I never had. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. I was too busy smiling, too busy trying to be the good mother-in-law, the kind that doesn't complain, the kind that just wants her son to be happy. This story isn't about a big fight. There was no screaming match, no dishes thrown against the wall. It was a quiet thing, a slow, steady leak in the foundation of my life that I ignored until the whole structure started to crumble. It started with a request for help, and it ended with me holding a new key to a door I'd never locked in the first place. To understand what happened, you have to understand what this house means to me. It's not just a building, it's a scrapbook. The kitchen counter has a little notch in it from where Brian, when he was about 4, tried to help me crack an egg with a hammer. The hallway wall has a faint, faded blue smudge that no amount of scrubbing will ever get rid of, from the time Frank spilled a gallon of paint. We were laughing too hard to clean it up properly. This house was our life. When Frank died, it became my anchor. It was the place where I could still smell his coffee in the morning. It was the place where I could sit in his old armchair and feel like he was just in the next room. I paid off the mortgage with his life insurance money. It was the last gift he ever gave me. The deed is in my name, only my name. For years, it was just me, the quiet, and the ghosts of a happy life. I gardened. I joined a book club at the local library. I made friends with my neighbor, a widow named Alina who lives 2 houses down. We'd walk to the diner for breakfast every Thursday. It was a simple life, but it was mine. Then, 2 years ago, the economy got tight. I didn't know the details, but Brian and Vanessa started to struggle. There were whispers about Vanessa's freelance contracts drying up, about Brian's company going through a restructuring. He called me one evening, his voice different, tighter than usual. He came over on a Saturday. He brought me flowers, which he never did unless he wanted something. I could always tell. He sat in his father's old chair, and he told me they needed a bridge. "Just until we figure out our next move, Mom," he said. He was scratching the back of his neck, a nervous habit he's had since he was a teenager. "A few weeks, maybe a couple of months. We just need to catch up. Vanessa has some big projects coming up, but we need a place to land in the meantime." I hesitated. I can admit that now. The thought of someone else in my space, in my quiet house, made my stomach tighten. But then I looked at him. My boy. The same boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. The same boy who stood beside me at his father's funeral, his hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. I said yes. How could I say no? They moved in the following Sunday. 4 suitcases, 3 garment bags, a flat-screen TV that was bigger than my dining table, and a lot of boxes labeled with Vanessa's sharp, black handwriting. Office, kitchen 2, guest bath. I stood on the porch, watching them unload. I'd spent the whole week clearing out space, moving my things to make room. I moved my collection of vintage teacups from the living room shelves to a high cupboard in the hall. I packed away Frank's fishing trophies, the ones he was so proud of, and put them in the garage. Vanessa walked through the front door and paused. She looked at the living room, at the floral wallpaper, at the cross-stitch I'd made that said, "Bless this mess." She took a deep breath. "It's charming," she said, but the way she said it, it sounded like a different word. A word like small or old. I smiled. "It's home," I said. The first week was a whirlwind. I tried to make it nice. I made my famous lasagna on their first night, the one with 3 kinds of cheese and Frank's secret spice blend. I set the table with the cloth napkins. I even lit a candle. We sat down to eat, and after 2 bites, Vanessa put her fork down. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, looking at Brian. "I can't, the dairy, it's been making me so bloated." She pushed the plate away and started scrolling through her phone. Brian gave me a quick, apologetic look, but he didn't say anything. He just kept eating. That was my first sign, but I ignored it. I just said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll make a salad tomorrow." I was so eager to please, so eager to make them comfortable, that I didn't realize I was already starting to disappear from my own home. The first week, they rearranged the living room. They moved my armchair, the one Frank used to sit in, into the corner. They put a sleek white sofa in its place. The next week, they changed the coffee maker. Mine, which had been making perfectly good coffee for 20 years, was replaced by a silver contraption that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. Vanessa explained it to me slowly, like I was a child. "It's a pour-over system, Nancy. It extracts the oils more gently. You'll see." I didn't see. I just missed the familiar gurgle of my old machine. I started to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I'd walk into the kitchen for a glass of water, and Vanessa would be in there, her laptop open, her expensive perfume filling the room. She'd smile, but it was a tight smile. A smile that said, "Do you need something?" The little things began to pile up. I'd go to put my favorite mug in the cabinet, and it wouldn't be there. I'd find it in a box in the garage. My collection of cookbooks, the ones with the stained pages and the handwritten notes, were moved to a bottom shelf in the hall closet, replaced on the kitchen counter by 3 minimalist cookbooks with white covers and gold lettering. I tried to talk to Brian about it. One night, after Vanessa had gone to bed, I found him in the den, watching a game on his tablet. I sat on the edge of the sofa. "Brian," I said, keeping my voice low, "I feel a little like I'm in the way. The living room feels different. I can't find my things." He didn't look up from his tablet. "Mom, we're just trying to make it feel like home. You know, functional, it's only temporary. You want us to be comfortable, right?" "Of course I do," I said, "but..." "Then it's fine," he said, cutting me off. He finally looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Vanessa, just trying to organize things. She's good at that. It's her thing." That was the end of the conversation. I went back to my room, my heart feeling heavy in my chest. I was beginning to realize that in this house, under my own roof, my comfort was no longer the priority. I remember one particular morning, a few weeks in. I got up early, as I always do, to make my tea. I walked into the kitchen in my slippers and my old robe. Vanessa was already there, standing at the counter in her workout clothes, sipping water. She looked at me. "Good morning, Maggie," she said. "Good morning," I replied, heading for the cabinet where I kept my tea. "I was thinking," she said, her voice light and casual. "You know, to help us all feel more settled, maybe we could depersonalize a little, just in the common areas. It helps with clarity." I turned around, a box of tea bags in my hand. "Depersonalize?" "Yeah," she said, waving a hand around the room. "The photos, the little knickknacks, it creates visual noise. If we just keep the surfaces clear, it'll feel more open. I looked around the kitchen. There was a photo of Frank and me on our wedding day, a little ceramic frog Brian made in summer camp, a small painting of the Ohio State House that my mother had given me. It wasn't a museum. It was my life. "Those are family things," I said, my voice quiet. "I know," she said, her smile never wavering. "And they're precious. But we could put them in your room, or maybe the garage for now. Just while we're here, it would really help me focus. I have a big pitch coming up." She said it like she was doing me a favor. That afternoon, I found a box in the hallway. I carefully wrapped the ceramic frog, the wedding photo, my mother's painting. I taped the box shut and carried it to the garage. I stood there for a moment among the lawnmower and Frank's old tools, and I felt a part of me being packed away, piece by piece. But I didn't say a word. I just went back inside, made my tea, and retreated to my bedroom to drink it. I started spending more time in there. It was the only room that still felt like mine. I'd read in there. I'd eat my lunch in there. I'd watch my mystery shows on a small tablet with headphones on, so I wouldn't disturb her meditation time in the living room. The months started to blur together. What was supposed to be a few weeks turned into 6 months, then 8. The word temporary began to feel like a cruel joke. The house no longer smelled like my vanilla candles or Frank's coffee. It smelled like Vanessa's lavender and bergamot diffuser, which was always running, pumping a constant, cloying scent into the air. The money started to come up too. It was subtle at first. A text from Brian asking if I could cover the electric bill this month because they were waiting on a client payment. I said yes. I transferred $450 from my savings. The next week, it was the car insurance, $600. "Just a short-term squeeze, Mom," he'd say. Then it was groceries. Then it was his accountant's fee. I started to lose track. I'd always been careful with my money. Frank and I saved every penny, but my monthly Social Security check and my small pension were just enough for me. I started dipping into the savings account Frank had left me. I told myself it was an investment in my son, in my family. I'd write the checks with a shaky hand, telling myself it was okay, that I was helping. One day, I went to the mailbox and found my bank statement. It had been opened. The envelope was torn cleanly across the top, not ripped like in a hurry. I felt a cold rush go through me. I went inside and found Vanessa in the kitchen. "Vanessa," I said, holding up the envelope, "did you open my mail?" She looked at it, then at me. She didn't seem embarrassed at all. "Oh, that," she said. "It must have been mixed in with ours. I was sorting everything. I thought it was a credit card offer. I didn't even look at it." She was lying. I could see it in the way she didn't quite meet my eyes. But I didn't have the proof. I just said, "Please don't open my mail, Vanessa. It's addressed to me." She shrugged. "Sorry, it won't happen again." But the way she said sorry felt more like a dismissal than an apology. I started hiding my important papers after that. My passport, the deed to the house, Frank's will. I put them in a shoebox and shoved it under my bed. I felt ridiculous hiding things in my own home, but I didn't know what else to do. The turning point, the moment I started to realize just how deep this had gone, was when I heard them talking one night. I couldn't sleep. I got up to get a glass of water. As I passed their bedroom door, I heard Vanessa's voice, low and intense. "We can't live like this forever, Brian. It's my career, too. We need space. We need a place that feels like ours." I heard Brian's muffled reply. I couldn't make out the words, just the weary tone. "Then we need to talk to her," Vanessa said, her voice getting sharper. "This place has so much potential, but she's stuck in the past. All this clutter, all this stuff. It's like a museum to a dead man." A dead man? She was talking about Frank, my husband, the father of her husband. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cool floorboards under my bare feet. I felt a lump form in my throat so big I couldn't swallow. "It's her house," Brian said, his voice clearer this time. "It's a house," Vanessa snapped. "It's not a life. We're the ones who are here now. We're the future. She needs to think about that. She needs to think about what's best for all of us." I didn't hear the rest. I turned around and went back to my room, my glass of water forgotten. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling. For the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. I wasn't just a guest in my own home. I was an obstacle, a museum piece that needed to be cleared out to make room for their future. I didn't confront them. I didn't have the strength. I just started making myself even smaller. I'd wait for them to eat before I went to the kitchen. I'd take my meals on a tray in my room. I'd even stop going to the living room altogether. I'd just stay in my room, in my chair by the window, watching the world go by on Sycamore Street, wondering when I'd stopped being a part of it. About a year into their stay, my best friend, Alina, went through a hard time. Her sister, who lived up in Sandusky, had a stroke. Alina was devastated. They were close, the way me and Clara are close. She was going up to stay with her for a while to help with her recovery. She was worried, scared. She needed me. "Maggie, could you come up for a few days?" She asked me on the phone, her voice thick with tears. "Just to keep me company. I don't want to be alone there." I looked at my calendar. I looked at the silent house around me. I thought of the way Vanessa would sigh when I walked into the kitchen. I thought of the constant feeling of being in the way. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "I'll leave Friday morning." I needed the break. I think, deep down, I knew I needed to get away from that house, from the constant pressure, from the feeling that I was slowly being erased. I needed to remember who I was without them. I told Brian that night at dinner. "I'm going to go stay with Alina for a few days," I said, pushing a green bean around my plate. "Her sister had a stroke. She needs support." Vanessa's head snapped up, and for the first time in months, she gave me a genuine smile. A full, bright smile. "Oh, that's wonderful, Maggie," she said. "She needs you, and you need a change of scenery. It'll be good for you to get some fresh air." She was so enthusiastic. It almost made me forget the conversation I'd overheard. Almost. I packed a small bag. I left a note on the kitchen counter, propped up against the fruit bowl. "Back Sunday by late afternoon. Thank you, Maggie." I called Brian before I left, just to let him know I was heading out. He sounded distracted. "Okay, Mom, have a good time. Drive safe." The drive to Sandusky was 2 hours. I drove in silence, the windows down, letting the wind blow through my hair. It felt good. It felt like freedom. I stayed with Alina for 5 days. We sat on her porch, drank tea, and talked about old times. We cried about her sister. I helped her organize her bills and made her laugh when she was feeling down. I slept in her guest room, which was filled with the smell of lilacs from her garden. It was peaceful. For the first time in over a year, I slept through the night. When I drove back on Sunday, I felt lighter. The knot in my stomach had loosened. I was ready to go home. Maybe I thought I could talk to Brian again, really talk, lay it all out. This was my house. I'd been a fool to let things get this far. I pulled into the driveway at about 4:30 in the afternoon. Their sleek black SUV was in the driveway, a car I'd helped them pay for when their old one broke down. I smiled, feeling a little nervous but hopeful. I got out of my old Civic, grabbed my overnight bag, and walked up the porch steps. The welcome mat was still there, crooked, reading "Home, Sweet Home." I fumbled for my keys in my purse. I found the key, the old brass one that had fit this lock for over 40 years. I put it in the keyhole. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I jiggled it. I pulled it out and blew on it like that would make a difference. I tried a third time. The key went in, but it wouldn't turn. It was like trying to start a car that wasn't yours. I stood there, confused. My first thought was that there'd been a break-in. Maybe someone had changed the locks for safety. But then I looked closer at the door handle. It was shiny. New. And there, on the edge of the door, barely visible in the afternoon light, was a small white sticker. Safeguard lock and key. Installed Friday, 9:15 a.m. Friday, the day after I left for Alina's. Not even 24 hours after I'd driven away. I just stood there, staring at that sticker. It felt like the world had stopped. The birds were still chirping. The wind was still rustling the leaves in the big maple tree. But for me, everything was frozen. My mind was a blank white sheet of paper. Friday, they changed the locks on Friday, while I was gone. While I was being a friend to Alina, they were here in my house making sure I couldn't get back in. No call, no warning, nothing. I pressed the doorbell. I could hear it chime inside. I waited. Nothing. I knocked. I knocked again, harder this time. The sound of my knuckles on the wood echoed in the quiet afternoon. I could see the curtains in the living room were drawn. The house was silent. I took a step back and looked up at the windows. All the curtains were closed. It was as if the house was holding its breath. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I called Brian. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Brian, it's Mom. I'm back from Aliner's. I can't get in. The locks have been changed. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Please call me. I hung up and waited. I stood on the porch, my overnight bag at my feet, for what felt like an eternity. I watched the street. An old man walked his dog. A car drove by. Life was going on, normal and peaceful, while mine was crumbling around me. I called again after 10 minutes, straight to voicemail. I waited another 10 minutes, then walked down the driveway and sat in my car. I leaned my head against the steering wheel. I was in shock. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I drove around the block just to give them a chance. Maybe Brian had gone out for milk. Maybe it was a mistake. But when I circled back, the black SUV was still in the driveway. It hadn't moved. They were home. They were home, and they were ignoring me. I got out of the car again. This time, I didn't knock. I just stood there on my porch, on the porch Frank and I had built, and I looked at the door. The door I'd walked through 1,000 times. The door I'd carried Brian over when he was sick. The door Frank had walked out of on the last morning of his life. It was then that the feeling hit me. Not anger. Not yet. It was something colder, deeper. It was the feeling of a door closing, not just on a house, but on a part of my heart I didn't know could be shut. It was the feeling of being erased. They had decided without me that this was no longer my home. I didn't cry. I wish I had. It might have made me feel better, but I was too stunned for tears. I just walked back to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there, sitting in my own driveway, looking at my own house like a stranger. I drove to the only place I could think of, the Oak Haven Public Library. It was quiet. It was safe. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the brick building. I thought about going in, about checking out a book, about pretending my world hadn't just ended. But I couldn't move. My phone buzzed. I looked down, my heart leaping into my throat. It was a text from Brian. Mom, we need to talk, but can we do it tomorrow? We're swamped today. You can stay at a hotel. I'll send you some money. I stared at the message. You can stay at a hotel. Like I was a distant relative who'd shown up unannounced. Like this wasn't my home. The home I'd paid for. The home I'd raised him in. The home where his father had died in my arms. I didn't reply. I just put the phone down. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his hotel. I wanted my home. I drove to a gas station on the edge of town. I used the restroom. I bought a bottle of water and a pack of peanut butter crackers. I sat in my car in the gas station parking lot and ate them, watching the sun go down. I was 72 years old. I had a house 2 miles away that was paid off. I had a son who lived in it. And I was eating crackers in a gas station parking lot because the door wouldn't open for me anymore. That night, I drove back to my neighborhood. Not to my house, but 2 blocks away. I parked under a big oak tree on a quiet street. I reclined my seat as far as it would go, pulled a thin blanket from the back seat over me, and tried to sleep. I didn't. I just lay there, the silence of the night pressing in on me, the betrayal of it all settling into my bones like a cold that wouldn't leave. I woke up at dawn, stiff and cold. My neck ached, my knees ached. I was too old to sleep in a car, but I was too stubborn to give in. I drove back to the gas station to use the restroom again. I bought a cup of terrible coffee just to be able to sit there for a few minutes. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, smiled at me. "Have a good day, ma'am," he said. I nearly burst into tears because he was the first person who had been kind to me in 24 hours. By 7 a.m., I was parked near my house again. The morning was cool, the dew heavy on the grass. I saw the lights in the kitchen flick on. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Vanessa stepped out onto the porch in her silk robe, a mug in her hand. I recognized the mug. It was one I'd given her for Christmas. It said Queen Bee on it. She stood there, looking out at the yard, sipping her coffee. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look worried. She looked satisfied, like she'd finally gotten what she wanted. She looked at the maple tree, then back at the door, and went back inside. The door closed with a solid, final click. I watched her from my car, and something inside me shifted. The numbness started to thaw, and underneath it, I found something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Clarity. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. I was done. Done letting them treat me like a visitor in my own life. Done shrinking to make them comfortable. Done waiting for Brian to remember who he was. I started the car and drove away, but I wasn't running. I was going to do something I should have done a long time ago. I was going to take my life back. I drove straight to the hardware store. It was just opening. A man named Pete was unlocking the door. He's owned the place for years. He and Frank used to talk fishing there. "Morning, Maggie," he said, holding the door for me. "You're out early. What can I do for you?" "I need a locksmith," I said. My voice was steady. "A good one, someone who can change a lock today." He looked at me for a moment, a question in his eyes, but he didn't ask it. He just nodded. "Call Sal's Lock and Key. He's the best. Tell him Pete sent you." I called Sal from my car. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff. "Sal's." "Hi, my name is Maggie Tanner. Pete from the hardware store gave me your number. I need a lock changed. Today, as soon as possible." There was a pause. "You got the new hardware?" "No, I just need the old one off and a new one on. I have the keys." He didn't ask why. He just said, "I can be there in an hour. I'll bring a few options." An hour later, I was standing on my porch again. Sal pulled up in a white van. He was a big man with a kind face and a quiet way about him. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at the new lock on my door, then at me. "This one's only a few days old," he observed. "Yes," I said. "It was put on without my permission." He didn't even blink. "All right then, let's get it off." I stood beside him as he worked, my arms crossed, watching him remove the sleek, modern lock that Vanessa had chosen. He worked quickly, efficiently. In less than 10 minutes it was off, lying on the porch like a dead thing. He held up a new deadbolt, solid brass, heavy. "This one's a good, solid lock," he said. "No nonsense." "Perfect," I said. He installed it in minutes. When he was done, he handed me 2 new keys. "You want a third?" "No," I said. 2 is plenty." He packed up his tools, then looked at me, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You need anything else, Maggie, you give me a call." "I will," I said. "Thank you, Sal." He drove away. I stood on the porch, holding the 2 keys in my palm. They were cold and heavy. I took a deep breath, put one of them in the lock, and turned it. It clicked open, solid and true. I walked into my house. It was quiet. The lavender scent from Vanessa's diffuser still hung in the air. The white sofa was still in the living room. My photos were still missing. My Frank's chair was still shoved in the corner. But the floor still creaked under my step. The clock above the stove still ticked. And as I walked down the hallway, I saw the morning sun streaming through the kitchen window, just like it always had. It lit up the counter, the old tile, the spot where Frank always put his coffee cup. It was my house. It was still my house. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I just started. I walked into the master bedroom, the room that was once Frank's and mine. Vanessa had turned it into a showroom. Her clothes filled the closet. Her shoes lined the floor. Her magazines were stacked on the nightstand. A white noise machine sat where my reading lamp used to be. I opened the closet and saw my own clothes, the few I'd been allowed to keep in there, pushed to one side, covered in dust. I took them out one by one and laid them on the bed. Then I started taking down Vanessa's things. I didn't throw them. I folded them neatly, the way I'd learned to fold things in a department store when I was a girl. I put her clothes in her suitcases. I packed her shoes, her books, her magazines, her white noise machine. It took me 2 hours, 2 hours of calm, deliberate work. I carried the suitcases out to the porch, one by one, and placed them on the lawn just beside the steps. I lined her shoes up next to them. I put her diffuser on top of a box. Then I went to the guest room. Brian's things were there mostly. I was gentler with his. I packed his laptop bag, his clothes, his collection of baseball caps. I placed his things next to hers. I made 2 piles, his and hers, neat, orderly. When I was done, I stood on the porch and looked at it all. It was a strange sight. Their lives boxed up and sitting on my front lawn. I felt a pang of something, not regret exactly. Sorrow. For the son I thought I had. For the family I thought we could be. I went back inside and made myself a cup of tea. I used my old kettle, which I found in a cupboard under the sink. I used my favorite mug, which I'd found in a box in the garage labeled Donate. I sat at the kitchen table, the table where Brian had done his homework, where Frank and I had planned our vacations, and I waited. At 10:00 a.m., I heard a car door slam, then voices, then footsteps on the porch, a sharp knock. "Maggie," Vanessa's voice, high and thin. "Maggie, why are our things on the lawn? The lock, what's going on?" I didn't move. I took another sip of tea. Another knock, harder this time. "Mom," Brian's voice. "Mom, open the door." I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. They stood there, both of them, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. Vanessa's arms were crossed. Brian looked pale. "Why is our stuff on the lawn?" Vanessa demanded, her voice sharp. I looked at her, then at Brian. "You changed the locks on my house," I said, my voice quiet and calm. "You left me to sleep in my car." Brian took a step forward. "Mom, it was a misunderstanding. We were going to call you. We just thought." "You thought what?" I asked. "You thought I wouldn't come back, or you thought I'd just go away quietly, go to a hotel and let you have my home." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Vanessa's face was red. "This is completely ridiculous, Maggie. You're being dramatic. We were just trying to get some security. It was a precaution. We didn't know when you were coming back." "You had my note," I said. "It was on the kitchen counter. I said Sunday afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon." She scoffed. "A note? You expect us to live by a note? You can't just lock us out of our home." I stepped forward, not aggressively, but firmly. "This is not your home," I said. "This is my home. My name is on the deed. I paid for it. I raised my son in it. My husband died in it. You are guests here, and you have overstayed your welcome." The word guests hung in the air. Brian flinched as if I'd hit him. "Mom, come on," he said, his voice cracking. "We're family." "Are we?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "You changed the locks on me. You didn't call. You let me sleep in my car. Is that how family treats each other?" He looked down at the porch floor, his shoulders slumping. Vanessa was glaring at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You have 15 minutes to gather anything you missed," I said, stepping back from the doorway. "Then I want you to leave." "Where are we supposed to go?" Brian asked, his voice a whisper. I looked at him, this man I had carried in my body, fed with my own hands, stayed up with night after night when he was sick. I felt a deep, aching sadness, but I didn't waver. "You weren't worried about where I was supposed to go," I said. "Figure it out." They walked past me into the house. Vanessa moved quickly, gathering the few things she hadn't packed, her movements jerky with anger. Brian lingered in the hallway, looking at the photos of himself as a boy that were still on the wall. I had never taken them down. "Mom," he said, his voice thick, I didn't know it would come to this." "You didn't want to know," I said. "That's the problem." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. But the moment passed. Vanessa came back down the stairs, her arms full of a few last items. "I can't believe you're doing this," she spat at me as she walked out the door. I followed them to the porch. They loaded the last of their things into the SUV. Brian stood by the driver's side door, looking back at me one more time. "Can we talk about this later?" he asked. "You can call me," I said, "when you're ready to listen." He got in the car. Vanessa didn't look at me. The SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared down Sycamore Street. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the empty street. The pile of their belongings was gone. The lawn was just grass again, slightly flattened where their suitcases had been. I picked up the Queen Bee mug that Vanessa had left behind on the porch railing. I looked at it for a moment, then carried it inside and put it in the box of things I was going to donate. I went back into the house. The silence was different now. It wasn't the tense, waiting silence of the past year. It was a peaceful silence, a silence of relief. I spent the rest of the day putting my house back together. I pulled Frank's old armchair out of the corner and put it back in its place by the window. I went to the garage and opened the box labeled Donate. I took out my wedding photo, the ceramic frog, my mother's painting. I put them back on the shelves. I found my red kettle in the cupboard and put it back on the stove. I found my old coffee maker in the basement and put it on the counter, right next to Vanessa's sleek silver machine. For now, I decided to keep both. It was my kitchen. I could have 2 coffee makers if I wanted. That evening, I sat in Frank's chair, my old Afghan over my knees. I looked around the living room. It was a little messy. There were still boxes to go through, but it was my mess. It was my home. And for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed, a text from Brian. "We're at a hotel, we'll figure something out. Can we talk tomorrow?" I looked at the message for a long time. I thought about answering. I thought about calling him, screaming at him, asking him how he could do this to me. But I didn't. I put the phone down. Tomorrow, I thought. I'll think about it tomorrow. Tonight, I'm just going to sit in my house and be at peace. It's been a month since that day. A month of quiet, a month of reclaiming. Brian calls every few days now. Not texts, calls. We talk for a few minutes. He's found an apartment downtown. He doesn't mention Vanessa much. I don't ask. He sounds different. Softer. A little lost. He asks about the house, about the garden, about how I'm doing. It's like he's trying to remember who I am. I haven't invited him over yet. I'm not ready. He needs to understand, really understand what he did. That it wasn't just about a lock. It was about respect. It was about seeing me as a person, not just a resource. I don't know if he'll ever fully get it, but I know that I'm not going to make it easy for him. My peace is too precious now. Alina came back from Sandusky a week ago. Her sister is doing better. She came over for tea the day after she got home. I told her everything. She sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her mug, listening without interrupting. When I was finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Maggie," she said. "You stood up for yourself. After all these years, you finally did it." I smiled, a real smile. Better late than never, right? We walked to the diner for breakfast that Thursday, just like old times. We sat in our usual booth, ordered our usual eggs and toast. The waitress, Darlene, asked where I'd been. "I was just finding my way back home," I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She just smiled and poured me more coffee. I'm sitting on my porch now, writing this. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The big maple tree is just starting to turn, a few leaves at the top beginning to show that brilliant orange. Frank's old chair is beside me, empty, but it doesn't feel sad anymore. It feels like a reminder of what I had and what I fought to keep. I look at the front door. It's the same old door, but with a new brass lock. It's a good lock, a solid lock. It keeps my house safe. But more than that, it keeps me safe. It's a symbol of a line I finally learned to draw. A line that says, "I matter, my home matters, my peace matters." If there's a lesson in all of this, I guess it's that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who will take the most from you if you let them. Not because they're evil, but because they're blind. They see your kindness as weakness, your patience as permission. And the only way to make them see you, truly see you, is to stand up, to stop shrinking, to hold the key to your own life and never, ever hand it over. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a little while. But anger is a heavy thing to carry at my age. I've let it go. Now I'm just clear about what I want, what I deserve, and who I am. I am Maggie Tanner. I live in the house on Sycamore Street. It has a good lock on the door, a maple tree in the backyard, and a ghost of a man I loved who still makes his coffee in the morning if you listen closely enough. It's my home. It always has been. And now it always will be. I put the key in my pocket, take one last look at the sky turning pink, and go inside. The porch light flickers on, casting a soft glow onto the welcome mat. Home, sweet home. It's not crooked anymore. I fixed it myself.